So ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's give a warm round of applause for Mr. Charles Stross.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Good?
Yeah.
Great. That's working well.
The stool and books down so that we can see them when we start.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I got some good news today, incidentally, which is Halting State came out just 10 days ago. It's now gone into its second printing. So I noticed a fair number of copies of it. Those are first editions now. Yeah. Great.
Soon to be signed first editions.
Soon to be signed, yeah. How to put it? Halting State is sort of a bunch of different books covering a bunch of different topics. When I was trying to sell it to my editors, I was sort of pitching it as Christopher Brookmyre meets Neil Stevenson. I don't know if anyone knows Christopher Brookmyre, very happening Scottish crime writer, who's going bestseller in Scotland at present. Anyway, most of them sort of backed away and said, sort of, get away from me, you freak, that's weird. Except for one editor who very kindly offered me a contract for it, which is why it's now in print. It is a novel largely about the future of gaming, but also about how new technologies sort of weave themselves seamlessly into our existing society, so that on the surface it looks superficially unchanged and similar, but under the surface, under the skin, yeah. Under the skin, everything functions differently. A lot of us role-play our way through life all the time. In fact, arguably, not enough people actually get caught out doing this. And it looked to me as if games were a very interesting metaphor for the way we interact with each other as well as with computers. And in writing a novel about gaming, I decided, among other things, I was going to write it in the second person as well, which is pretty weird and unusual in fiction. But the interesting thing about the second person narrative, you know, I am talking to you, I am telling you what's going on. You're lost in a maze of twisty little passages, all are alike. You've been eaten by something nasty down on the 27th level. It's the natural narrative voice of the computer game. It's been the natural narrative voice of a computer game ever since Crowther and Woods wrote their first adventure game in 1974-75-ish. You know, other than the early computer graphics games, which were basically hand-eye coordination tests, actual narrative fiction got its start with the text-only adventure games. And the reason they're told in the second person seems to me to be because what a computer game is at that level is a system for generating stories. They're rather intricate pieces of software in their own right that bolt together phrases and patterns, and they tell them to you, the user, because the story is no longer coming out of an author's head. It's coming out of a little black box on a table in front of you. Sometimes in fiction or drama we sort of talk about breaking the fourth wall, the wall between the stage and the audience, and coming out into the audience. In a way, the computer game is about erecting a whole new type of fourth wall, or maybe a fifth wall. You know, we're going multidimensional here. And it's very disturbing to be told by a computer how you're feeling, or what you're doing. For example, I can tell right now that you're sitting half asleep in an armchair, figuratively speaking. And if I tell you this, sooner or later you might even start to believe me. Your eyes are closed, and you feel very unsteady. Your head's full of a post-viral haze, the cotton wool of slowed reflexes and dulled awareness. In stark contrast to the normal state of affairs, you can hear yourself think. There's just one little voice wobbling incessantly about from side to side of your cranial prison, which should be no surprise after the amount of skunk you just smoked. In the distance, the chiming clangour of tram bells sets a glorious harmony reverberating across the rooftops, and you're asking yourself, like the witchy weird voice in a video of an old Laurie Anderson performance, what am I doing here? You see, there's an example of second-person narrative. There's a ringing in your ears. I must have drifted off. That's what you tell yourself. That's the trouble with smoking stuff to help yourselves forget. Yourselves? Well, there's you, and there's Mitch, and there's Budgie. Tom couldn't come because he was busy being newly married and responsible. But between you and Mitch and Budgie, you're three of the four pillars of a former social network architecture team, and you've flown down here on a budget shuttle from Edinburgh to get falling down legless and scientifically test all that research into whether cannabis destroys short-term memory. Because, God help you, it's better than thinking about how badly you've been shafted. This is how come you're sitting in a half-collapsed armchair, stoned out of your box, on the narrow strip of flagstoned pavement alongside the Prinsengracht Canal, listening to alarm bells. And you're contemplating the wreckage of your career. You've spent 4 years in the elite dirty tricks wing of Lupusoft, working on special projects for nobbling your corporate master's rivals. Then you got a transfer to the relatively clean gameplay side of steaming. It was 4 years of top-secret death marches and psychotic deadline chases in beige walled cubicle hell. 4 years of frenzied developer boot camps held in sinister, wire-fenced floodlit compounds in the Grampians. 4 years of weekends spent following a football team at home and away events with a laser rangefinder and a dynamics package. And wasn't it fun trying to avoid the big hooligan from Portobello who got it into his head that you're some kind of headhunter from down south who's going to gut his team, and he kept trying to get his posse to stomp your head in. 4 years, and all the while you were living off peanut butter sandwiches and stale sushi takeaways while your waistline expands and your visual range contracts as you stared at a screen the size of a secondary school whiteboard all day long and half the night. Then there were the dying weekends. These were weekends stolen from a company management by sheer bloody-minded smackdowns with human resources. Stolen so you could go back to Rochdale to spend some time with your mum, who was in a bad way from the lung cancer, or to visit Sophie and Bill and your nieces. Until one day, Ma wasn't there anymore, and all the rest of it. And that's you in that corner there. You with your pokey €60,000 salary and the legacy that went part way to a wee cottage in the colonies and a mortgage you won't pay off before you retire, and no life whatsoever. Well, there's your knitting habit and there's your criminal record, but that's just fodder for an obsessive-compulsive disorder. What's left is your life. It's been your life since you clawed your way from CS graduate school to startup 7 years ago, and your so-called life is such a bijou piece of crap that there's no room for anything but work in it. So you've kept yourself too busy to care, until now. Last week they cancelled steaming. They told you to clear your desk at half an hour's notice. Here's your next month's pay in lieu, now get out of here, you freak. And you suddenly realised you haven't actually got a life, even though they made you learn more about Scottish Premier League football than the captain of the national squad, the bastards. Excuse me, sir, you cannot be sleeping here. And we start again. The worst thing about it all is that you hate football. Of course, to have admitted that you hated football while you were working on steaming would be a bit like one of the US president's staffers confessing to thinking that the country needed a short, sharp dose of communism and a side order of Islamic extremism to go. It's one of those things that you just couldn't talk about at Lupusoft. Not while they had the exclusive rights to both Hibs and Rangers fan club franchises. Not while they were trying to milk all the surplus income out of the fans, Neds and ne'er-do-wells, who figured that a live-action role-playing game where you get to play at football hooligans among consenting adults was better than the other kind of live-action role-playing game where you play at football hooligans with non-consenting adults, like the police. On the other hand, at least you were able to suppress or sublimate your hatred of football without too much difficulty. You're a liberal geek who thinks team player is a term of abuse, but you believe in society, you believe in checks and balances, and you believe in getting your own back on the thick-headed sports jocks who made life so excitingly unpleasant for you in school. As it happens, while you were working on steaming, you could convince yourselves that you were doing your bit, because any job that gets the brangling thugs playing a game on their mobies instead of lobbing tinnies and chibbing bystanders up the high street has got to be a good thing. Network-mediated live-action role-playing games have been the gaming success story of a decade, ever since Spooks came along to give actuaries a chance to live a secret agent life on the side. Steaming was set to ring the cash register again and take the nutters off the street, plus it paid the mortgage. At least that's how it looked until the Bologna Cup final disaster. And the double whammy of a social psych study in the Lancet the very next week, which stuck the proverbial sharpie in and twisted hard. Questions were asked in the lumpy-looking construction site down Holyrood Road, and ministers of state did wax worthy and serious, and proceed to apply the tools of uptight self-righteousness to the rump of a dead equine of games industry self-regulation with gusto and vigour. At this point, Lupusoft management revisited the risk-value trade-off inherent in defending their investment in a second division virtual world football hooliganism game against a class-action lawsuit. And they decided the professional thing to do was to downsize your team's sorry ass. Maybe it could have gone the other way in the boardroom if the police hadn't uncovered a network of Little League serial killer wannabes who were using steaming to rehearse next Saturday's riot over on Easter Road. But that was the final nail in the coffin. All the suit-wearing world loves a geeky scapegoat, and you boys were going down in flames. So there was only one thing to do. Fly out to Amsterdam and get absolutely plastered for the weekend, not to mention so stoned you're having auditory hallucinations to the sound of the tram bells. Hallucinations like, "Excuse me, sir, but you cannot sleep here." You open your eyes. The auditory hallucination is peering at you through her surveillance goggles as if she's never seen a stoned tourist before. She's been so polite that for a moment you feel a flash of perverse gratitude until the weed clears enough for you to realise that she's a member of the police and quite capable of summoning a van full of black-clad accomplices to vanish you into a concrete custody cell before you can snap your fingers. Excuse me a second. You try to say, "Please don't arrest me. I'm just a sleepy tourist. I won't be any trouble." But it all runs together at the back of your tongue and comes out as something like, "Ugh!" You tense your arms and prepare to lift yourself out of the armchair. Standing up seems like the right thing to do at this point. And that's when you realise the armchair is situated adjacent to a street sign on a pole to which your friends have helpfully handcuffed your left wrist. And the goddamn ringing noise won't stop. It's not in your ears after all, is it? "Ah," you say, dully staring past the cop in the direction of the antique shop on the other side of the pavement. There's something odd about the window and the pattern the lights make as they reflect off it, or don't, as the case may be. It's broken, you realise. Somebody has broken the antique shop window and dragged this annoyingly gezellig armchair out onto the pavement for you to sit in. Talk about game scenarios gone wrong. It's just like something you'd end up dumped into in Stag Night the Pursuit if you started griefing the bridesmaids. Does this chair belong to you, sir? Now, sometimes when you laugh, you come out with a burbling, hiccuping sound like a hyena choking to death on its own vomit. You can hear it now, welling up out of your shirt pocket, tinny and repetitive. It's your personal ringtone, as annoying as a very annoying thing indeed, except you don't owe any money to a bunch of gouging music industry executives for it. "Oh, excuse me, that's my phone." Your right hand is free, so you try and insert your fingers in your shirt pocket and play Chase for Moby. Somehow, in the past hour, your hand has gone cold and numb, and your digits feel like frankfurters as the handset slips past them, giggling like a maniac. "Pay attention, sir. Did you take that chair from the shop? Who handcuffed you to the no parking sign? I think you'd better blow into this meter, sir." She's a sight easier to understand than the local Edinburgh police, which is no bad thing. Unfortunately, the voice at the end of the line is also easy to understand. "Jack? Hi, it's Sophie. Are you all right? Are you busy right now?" "Oh, I'm busy. Can it wait?" "Oh, that's a shame. I'm really sorry, but can you do me a favour? It's Elsie's birthday the Tuesday after next, and I was wondering..." You breathe on the end of the cop's torch as she holds it under your mouth. Then you swallow. Your sister is tweedling on the end of a line, oblivious, and you really need to get her off the phone fast. You force unwilling lips to frame words in an alien language. "Email me, sis. Later." "But it's important," she insists. "Are you all right, Jack? Jack?" The plangent chords of her West Midlands accent form brassy highlights of light on the end of a torch where an LED is glowing red, just like the call disconnect button on your phone. "I think you'd better come with me, sir." The cop has a key to the handcuffs, for which you're duly grateful, but she wants you to put your phone away, and that's actually quite difficult. Sophie keeps going on about something to do with your oldest niece's birthday, and you keep agreeing with her because, will you please put the phone down, a Dutch cop is trying to arrest me, isn't a standard way to break off this kind of scenario. If only families came with safe words like any other kind of augmented reality game. Fingers are stuck at this impasse for a tense few seconds as you mug furiously at the officer until she raises one index finger, unlocks the handcuff from around the pole, twists your arm around the small of your back, grabs the Moby out of your grasp, and has your wrists pinioned before you can say hasta la vista. It's shaping up to be a great weekend, make no mistake, and there's always Monday to look forward to. Excuse me while I pause to lubricate. As you can tell, Jack's just had a rather bad Friday. So what happens next? Well, let's explore it. You've been in police cells precisely twice in your life before. There was the total disaster when you were 15. Then going back even earlier, there was the time when you were a wee thing, and Gav and Nick got you to moon the Lord Mayor when he was up for opening the new drop-in centre. Gav and Nick could run faster than you could, which is why, you now realise with perfect adult 2020 hindsight, they suckered you in. Both times, you were too young to really figure out how bad the trouble you were in was. It's somewhat less obvious to you now how you ended up being booked into an Amsterdam cop shop at 0 dark o'clock, largely because you were too addled on skunk and strong continental beer to know which way was up. But by morning, you've made up your mind that despite their laid-back reputation, Dutch police cells are no more fun than English ones, especially with a hangover. If you hadn't been arrested, you'd have been waking up this morning in a cramped room at the Bulldog, the hostel as in, notorious for remarkably low prices and dubious furnishings. Instead, you spend the night in a cell with a foam mattress, a light bulb, and a stainless steel sink and toilet combination. It's actually bigger than the room at the Bulldog, and the stains on the mattress are probably no worse. But there's no soap, no munchies, and worst of all, no internet to distract you from obsessively worrying about your miserable fate. Because, you know, you're terrified. You're doomed. It's the third time you've been arrested in your entire life, and your stress levels are so high that were a bunch of black-robed inquisitors to file chanting into your cell and lead you down a stony tunnel lined with manacled skeletons to a cavern furnished with an electric chair, it'd come as a relief. You don't have a clue what to expect, so when the door rattles and opens, you nearly jump out of your skin. Mr. Reed, come with me. It's another cop, built like a rugby jock and looking extremely bored. Where? You must look confused, because he speaks very slowly and loudly, as if to a half-witted foreigner. Step out of a cell and proceed to the end of a corridor. I'll tell you when to stop. But You glance down at your feet, then shrug. They took your shoes, your belt, your jacket, and your phone. Then they made you sign a form. Now some rules-obsessed part of your hindbrain is yammering up a fuss about going out without your shoes on. It's probably the same lobe of your brain that makes sure your fly's zipped up and your nose is wiped. The mummy lobe. Okay. You force yourself to take a slippery, sock-footed step forward, then another. Your head's throbbing in time to your heartbeat and your mouth tastes of dead rats. Now that you notice it, the mummy lobe starts nattering at you about brushing your teeth. There's an office with a desk in it and a police sergeant and a bunch of indiscreet cameras in luminous yellow enclosures labelled evidence in English and Dutch. They must get a lot of tourists here. There's also a shoebox with your stuff in it. Mr. Reed, sit down. You sit. Did you, on the evening of the 20th, throw any item at the window of the antique shop at 308 Prinsengracht? You frown, trying to remember. The mummy lobe is about to say, I don't think so, but I might be wrong. But you catch it in time, and what comes out is, no! The cop nods to himself and makes a note on his tablet. Did you take the armchair that the owners of 306 Prinsengracht had placed by the side of a road for a municipal waste pickup and move it so that it was outside the antique shop? That's an easier one. You don't remember anything about the armchair before you woke up in it. No. Another squiggle on the tablet. The cop frowns. Do you remember anything about last night? Anything at all? At this point, the mummy lobe makes another bid for freedom and grabs control over your larynx. And instead of saying, "Where's my lawyer?" you hear yourself saying, No, not until I woke up in that chair. I was in the Arrant's nest earlier in the evening, and we had a bit to drink, then we moved on, and things got vague. Then I woke up chained to the street sign. When you say we, who were you drinking with? Asks the cop. I was with Mitch and Budgie. Tom couldn't make it. He was on paternity leave. Enough. The cop makes another mark on his tablet, then pushes it aside and gives you a look. You quail. Your balls try to climb into your throat. You don't know what to expect. Mr. Reed, you've been the victim of a prank that got out of hand. Your DNA was not found on the stone that broke the shop window, on the window itself, and camera footage shows 3 other persons carrying you and the chair before handcuffing you to the street sign. So you're not suspected of vandalism or theft. But let me be clear. That level of drunkenness is a public order offence, and I believe we have sufficient evidence to obtain a conviction. Because it's a minor charge and you're a non-resident EU citizen, if you plead guilty, there's a fine of €250 on a spot offence, and I can release you immediately. If you choose to deny the offence, you have a right to a trial before the sub-district court. He leans back and crosses his arms. This strikes you as pretty harsh for the Amsterdam police, but you've heard they were having a crackdown. Just your bad luck to be caught up in it. What happens if I plead guilty, you ask? It's an administrative offence. There'll be no subsequent proceedings or criminal record. He looks bored. It's your decision. The offer is a no-brainer. Pay €250 and that's the end of it. It's not as if they're going to put you on a sex offenders register or send you to prison or something. The alternative is to face the uncharted waters of finding a Dutch lawyer and going to court, where they'll probably find you guilty as charged, then send the black-robed chanting inquisitors to lead you down a stony tunnel lined with manacled skeletons to a cavern furnished with an electric chair, just for wasting their time. And face it, the mummy lobe chirps, you were drunk, weren't you? You nod to the cop, then wince as your forehead reminds you that you've got a hangover. Do you take PayPal? The cop gestures at the box on the table. You'll receive an email with instructions for how to plead guilty. He pauses. You should remember that failing to plead by email and not attending a court session are much more serious offences than public drunkenness, and the Scottish police will prosecute you on our behalf. That you don't need. Okay, I'll pay, you say hastily. This interview is over. You can leave when you're ready. The cop stands and walks out the door, leaving you staring after him, with one shoe in your hand and the other on your left foot. Don't forget to tie your shoelaces, chides the mummy lobe. Remember, it's a serious offence. Which is, to some extent, the story of how Bob has lost his job. It should be fairly clear that he works at a rather unpleasant company, or did. Now, when he gets back to Edinburgh, he is about to find himself another line of work. Some contract work working for an insurance loss adjuster, or rather an insurance fraud investigator, who's part of a team of rather specialised underwriters who've been dragged up to Edinburgh to investigate a bank robbery. What makes the bank robbery somewhat weird is that it's happened inside a computer game. Even worse, there's real-world money at stake. The bank was run by a company, Hayek Associates, who earn their keep by stabilising the economies of in-game environments. Their job is to make sure that hyperinflation doesn't kick in and playing a game remains fun. Having had a lot of Vorpal blades stolen from the dungeon vaults is more than a joke. Hayek have been preparing a secondary offering, and it reeks of insider trading. The police are looking into it, and Elaine is looking into it along with the rest of her team. She has been assigned the Fall Guy job by her company, investigating security arrangements inside a bank in an imaginary place. Because this isn't her speciality, she's demanded a native guide, and the local recruitment agency have provided her with Jack. She's a long way from home, though, and there's more than one kind of game people play in this future. It's about 8:15 when you finally get out of Hayek Associates' offices and summon a taxi to take you back to your hotel room. You are, not to put it too pointedly, dog-tired. Excuse me. On the plus side, you've made some progress today. The cop, Sergeant Smith, looks like she's going to be a useful contact, and Jack seems to be paying his way. When you left him back of a bunker, he was elbow deep in whatever it is that programmers do, oblivious to everything else. Which is kind of annoying. He's the only person up here you know who isn't a co-worker, and you're facing an evening in a strange city, on your own with no guidance. But what the hell? They call Edinburgh the Athens of the North. There's got to be something you can do by yourself on a summer night, hasn't there? Well, maybe not. Back in your room, you have a quick shower, then check the eating out guide. By the time you've done that, it's past 9 o'clock and you're half past hungry. You're not keen on going out to any pubs hereabouts on your own, and the room service menu looks okay, so you order up a big green salad in penance for yesterday's business lunch. And then it's 10 at night and the hotel gym's closed, and where the hell did the day go? It's even worse than a late working weekday night in London. At least there you can break the commute home in a cocktail bar with some friends. By 10:30, you're glumly contemplating an early night and a 7 o'clock session in the gym when your phone rings. You look at the display with a sinking feeling. It's a particularly tedious LARP called Spooks, a real-time game in which you're acting your part in a shadowy pan-European intelligence agency locked in a struggle for global hegemony with the forces of Chinese military intelligence, the Russian FSB, and, of course, the CIA. Yeah? You try not to snap. Elaine Barnaby, this is Spooks Control. Are you busy right now? You glance around your beautifully decorated and ultimately sterile hotel room. Not really. You know I'm in Edinburgh. That's why we're calling. Your nameless control officer sounds dryly amused. Your authenticator is. He rattles off a string of nonsense words just to prove he's got access to your control file. I'm on a business trip. Well, so are we. We were hoping you could do us a small favour while you're there. How small? As usual, there's no face to go with this call, just an eye in a glass pyramid in Dockland's logo. If this was a video call, at least you could glare at him. It's 10:30. We need a small parcel delivering. A parcel. What's wrong with FedEx? Well, as you just pointed out, it's 10:30 at night. The parcel's sitting downstairs in your hotel lobby anyway, and he's delivering here. He sends you a set of GPS coordinates. That's about half a kilometre away from where you're sitting. Huh. You look at the phone speculatively. How many experience points do I get? The usual, plus a 20-minute walk before bedtime. The recipient is priceless. Control sounds smug. You can picture him sitting in some bedsit, working through his checklist of in-game tasks and grinding away to convince himself that he's got a life and can get to the next level. There's no easy way to say no without giving offence. And anyway, you're thinking about doing something before bed, so I'll do it, you say. Thank you. I've been told to tell you, Agent Barnaby, that a hell of a lot depends on this package being in place before midnight, local time. Sure. You hang up, pull your shoes and glasses on, grab your jacket, and go downstairs. It's dark outside, and there's a single, tired-looking clerk on reception. Hi, you've got a parcel for me? Barnaby, room 214. Let me just go and see. He shuffles off and returns with a package. Sign here, please. Sure. You swipe your phone over his reader and thumbprint the signature strip. Thanks. Outside, the evening air is cool, and it smells faintly of cherry blossom that's piling up in the gutters by the pavement. You pull the tab on the parcel. This recording will self-destruct in 30 seconds. Well, no, actually, it doesn't. Rumour has it, though, that the first Spooks campaign got the beta testers arrested and questioned for a week under the Terrorism Act, before the police figured out it was just a game. That's why you've got to carry a special endorsement on your ID card. The parcel turns out to contain a bland-looking black plastic box about the size of an old DVD case. and some heavy duty outdoor bonding pads. There's also a note on paper. Attached to front of building above eye level facing the street. When attached, initiate pairing with your phone to unnamed device 1142. Here is the passcode. Once paired, dial blah and leave the area. Once home, text control to confirm delivery. It's really bloody typical. You pocket the bugging device or whatever it is, key the coordinates into your specs, and let the overlay guide you along the pavement towards the target building. This sort of nonsense is part of the reason why you've been thinking of cancelling your Spook subscription. It's almost tediously realistic. There's no romance to it at all. No James Bond swigging cocktails with a pool in Grand Cayman. Just pick up package X, transport to location Y and phone number Z. Location Y for this mission turns out to be an impressive crescent of Georgian stone townhouses. They've got flights of steps like stone drawbridges, jutting out over a dry stone moat with windows in the basement. There are steps down to them as well, for their garden flats. You hunt around for a few minutes until you find the right set of steps, then approach the door. There's a row of 10 buzzers next to the entrance, and at the top of the row someone has chalked a blue rectangle with your Spook Cell war chalk sign in it. You take out the box and the adhesive pads, position it carefully, and jump through the hoops to switch the thing on. It's probably just a €10 inventory tracking phone and a camera to snap the back of another player's head when he leaves for work in the morning, but what the hell? You wait till you're halfway home before you begin to text control. As it happens, you're just keying your brief message when your specs vibrate for attention. You glance up. The Spooks overlay has activated itself, and it's telling you, 2-person tag team detected on your tail. The dictates of the game require you to take it seriously up to a point, even though you're too tired for this nonsense and you want to go to bed. Besides, what's more worrying, Spooks tries to map non-player characters onto real locals, and you can really live without 2 strangers following you around a strange city. You speed up slightly, not glancing round, that's your glasses job, and mumble, calling up a course into densely occupied areas around the corners of Princess Street and Lothian Road. Then you change direction, darting into a side street. Behind you, the blips on your head-up display turn to follow you. This isn't good. Get me a taxi, you mutter to your phone, and you break into a jog. The side street is nearly deserted. There are cars parked to either side of its cobbled quaintness. Then you see lights and hear traffic ahead. You can just about hear footsteps behind you now, and you break into a run, and then a taxi's headlights show up, swerving in towards the curb in front of you. "Where to, miss?" asks the driver, as you pull the door open and tumble inside. "Hotel Malmaison," you gasp, half out of breath. Behind you, the tail team falls away into the darkness as the taxi accelerates, carrying you back to the illusion of the real world. There's more than one way to play a game, and some games are more serious than others. 1 second. Sorry, my throat's hoarse. This is the second reading of this I've done today. There's more than one kind of game out there, and in addition to running around games and playing at spies games, or having other people play at spies with your body games, there are intellectual head games we play. And I figured I'd give you a final chunk of the book, not from the ending I should add, but a bit more insight into Jack's character, because Jack is a programmer, and I figured one of the things I wanted to do here was sort of try and depict a little bit about what it's like to be a computer programmer from the inside. And it's like that first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. "Hi, my name is Jack, and I've got a code problem. You're a grown-up these days. You don't wear a kamikaze pilot's Rising Sun headband and a t-shirt that screams, 'Debug this.' And you don't spend your weekends competing in extreme programming slams at windy campsites near Frankfurt. But it's generally difficult for you to use any machine that doesn't have at least one compiler installed." Speaking of the devil. In fact, you had to stick Python on your mobile phone before you even opened its address book for the first time. Not being able to brainwash it left you feeling handicapped, like you were a passenger instead of a pilot. In another age, you'd have been a railway mechanic or a grease monkey, crawling over the spark plugs of a DC-3. This is what you are. And the sad fact is, they can put the code monkey into a suit, but they can't take the code out of a monkey. This is why you more or less missed out completely on a very entertaining argument between Elaine and some dweeby, intense-looking Marketroid in casual Friday drag and fashionable specs, who seemed most put out about something. You were off in your own head at the time, trying to figure out a strategy for reducing the Himalayan pile of junk data that your query agents are going to pull out of the Zone database. And you just wish they'd all shut up so you could go back to drawing entity relationship diagrams on the walls of your padded cell in green crayon. In fact, they were so far out there that the mummy lobe forgot to threaten to set Sergeant Smith on you on account of your overdue library books. You even managed to forget about the weird phone call last night. You were, in short, coding. What's up with him? You remember the cop asking Elaine. I'm not sure. If I didn't know better, I'd say he was stoned, but he keeps twitching his fingers. I think he's in keyboard withdrawal or something. You surfaced for long enough to explain what you needed, and they got the Marketroid to tell Sam, the software librarian, to let you into the code repository and give you the authentication tokens needed. Then they found you a nice padded beige cubicle and parked you in it so you could design a tool for the job of trawling through several billion transactions. An indeterminate time later, an irritating voice inserted itself into your awareness. Jack? Hello, have you got a spare minute? No, you begin. Then shake yourself. Your bladder was threatening to go on strike. Your left calf was standing in for a pincushion at a convention of Belgian lace makers. And your eyeballs ached. Hang on a mo. You checkpointed your project and pulled your glasses off, then leaned back and stretched your arms over your head. Okay, I'm free now. Elaine leaned against the doorframe. She looked tired and irritable. It's nearly 6:30. Are you getting anywhere? Give me another 3 hours or so and I might be ready to switch it on. I thought you said this would be fast. It is. Give me a file of magic items and miscellaneous loot in well-formed, structured treasure language, and I've got a tool that can search one or more auction houses for stuff resembling each item in the file and give you back a proximity metric and some information about the seller. I've got one auction house plugin nearly finished and 4 more to write, but they're all variations on a theme after the first one. Trouble is, the responses won't be in STL, so I'll have to massage them a bit, and I've still got to test the thing. If you could leave me 5 or 10 test samples, I can leave it running overnight and see how well it works, and tomorrow I can get the rest going. She rolled her eyes. Okay. She sounded unconvinced. And that got your attention, because it was the sound of €1,000 an hour slipping away. Ever written a large spreadsheet, you ask? Yeah. And then tested it, made sure that what comes out is what's meant to come out. Yeah, but she stopped. What I'm doing here is like working up a pivot join and then some complex statistical breakdowns on 6 or 7 different tables, a couple of which are in different formats. If I rush it, it's going to come out wrong. Worst case, it'll come out looking right, but full of plausible garbage. If it's like writing a spreadsheet then, she raised an eyebrow, what the hell do I need you for? Because you don't have a couple of years to learn the Zone APIs and the Python 3000 language for scripting it. How long did it take you to learn to write that spreadsheet? Oh. You could hear the clunk as the gears engaged between her ears. Then she smiled, reassured. Another application of Advanced Programming 401, Managing the Managers. First of all, figure out how to tell them what you're doing in their own language. Writing a big spreadsheet with lots of macros was a bit Mickey Mouse, but you had to admit it wasn't too far removed from what you were doing. It was all data reduction when you get down to it. Okay, she said, I'll email you what data I've got. If you can run a test tonight, when will we know? If it doesn't crash and burn first thing tomorrow, at least we'll know something, even if there's nothing but smouldering wreckage. If we're lucky, it'll hit pay dirt overnight. If it didn't work, you'd fix it and then run it tomorrow with all the insurance claims you could get as input. Good. I'm going to go get something to eat. I'm starving. She paused for a couple of seconds. Well, see you tomorrow then. You smiled. See you later. A minute after that, you sat bolt upright in your chair and swore at yourself for missing a hidden query. But you're more at home with SQL than socialization. Innuendo isn't a language they teach in CS labs. Ah, well, you thought. You're just going to have to face up to another night with only a fish supper and your games console for company. It could have been worse. You might be unemployed as well. And that's the end of that extract, and if you don't mind, I'd like to give my larynx a few minutes off by asking if anybody's got any questions. Or wants me to ad-lib about the book as a whole. Okay, you appear to have a question.
Well, okay, between the time the book was written and between the time it came out pops the iPhone. And there's this whole bit in the book about suborning the phone, the first thing he has to do. How do you feel about the fact you can't even get a book out without reality catching up to it first?
The iPhone wasn't what really got me looking over my shoulder, because the iPhone is basically a walled garden. It's sort of the usual Apple 1.0 thing. The Jesus phone, it walks on water, it feeds the masses. But can you write code on it? I think not. Thank you, Steve. I'll take 2.0. Having said that,
They announced it's been jailbroken today.
Again.
Yes.
And they'll put the jail bars back again, and somebody will break it again. I'm sorry, no thank you. That's not what I want anyway. Design is lovely, but oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Anyway, to get back to your question, my editors were kind of a bit alarmed 3 months after I handed the manuscript in, when word came out of a bank collapsing inside an MMO. I think it was EVE Online. Some mad Eastern Europeans had set up a bank and convinced all the other players to start depositing money in it because they were paying an insane interest rate. And it turns out it was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, you can't get it out without reality.
This kind of put the wind up us. Again, one of the MacGuffins in Halting State is I've got to actually write a write-up at some point, probably for my blog, of the game platform I didn't come up with. Because one of the big problems with MMOs is they have to add server blades every time they add a few new players. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if you could rely on server virtualization to distribute the server workload around other players' mobile phones? But, you know, you never want to give the server to the actual players. They'll just hack it. So what you do is you have an open platform, sort of like Java for games, if you like, and the virtual servers that are provided, that backup for the games, are only running on the phones which run the clients of the players who are playing other games. And one of the side effects that I reasoned would be really handy if you could come up with this architecture is migrate avatars from one game to another. And you know, I thought this was sort of thinking several years ahead and being way outside the box, and what happens this bloody week? Little Labs and IBM turn around and announce they're working on a toolkit for migrating your avatars between virtual realities. What's a jobbing SF writer to do?
After he finishes cursing luridly?
Yeah. Actually, this book got started a few years ago with a conversation with Cory Doctorow in which we were kicking around the idea of a bank robbery in a computer game. And we were thinking about collaborating on a story but never got it together. And I was getting more and more interested in this and suddenly realised I had to write it now. And Ace had been buying my books 2 at a time on a 2-book contract. And I just finished Glasshouse and that was done. And my editor was saying, well, what do you want to write next? And I said, well, I want to write this insane Scottish police procedural about a bank robbery in a computer game 10 years in the future, told in the second person. And it'll look like a collision between Christopher Brookmyre and Neil Stevenson. And instead of saying, get away from me, you freak, she said, I'll take it on condition you write me another space opera.
Yay.
Practical-minded editors. And basically, she then said, well, now, can we have a space opera first? No. I have to write this book now. It will be obsolete in a year.
Then he skids just under the down.
Yeah, only just. Actually, there's a good point here. I suspect if Halting State had come out 2 or 3 years earlier, if I'd been enough of a visionary to do it 2 or 3 years earlier, you know, that's difficult. it might well have sunk under its own incomprehensibility. And in a couple of years' time, it's going to be boring. This is just the right time for it. You have a question, sir?
Well, it would seem like free publicity.
Hmm?
All of the, like the Ponzi scheme in the game and so forth, to some extent, that's free publicity.
It's priming the public opinion and public understanding. I mean, the clear sign that I had to write the book now was when Reuters sort of hired Warren Ellis as their correspondent in Second Life. I'm not sure this was insanely sensible of them, but it made a splash.
There's a big disclaimer at the top. So.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Anyone got a... Oh, you, sir.
I'd like to know, I mean, you probably hear it a lot of geeks, and you've made this transition from being, just working on technical stuff to really, really human creative stuff. I'd like to know, what helped you make the transition, and how did you plan it? Was it sudden, and what?
Okay. I first began selling short stories in 1986, some years before I got a computer science degree. Okay, I wanted to be a writer all along, but being realistic, you've got to do stuff to earn a living. So I ended up getting sucked into the .com vortex, and indeed was lead programmer of a small but moderately successful British .com from 97 to 2000. Then the company IPO'd, and the guys with suits with slits for the dorsal fins moved in. And I got pretty thoroughly shafted. It didn't help that I had a slight difference of opinion with the chief executive officer in the run-up to the IPO. Now, at the same time this was happening, another friend of mine in Edinburgh, and you could tell this was 1999 to 2000, his internet service provider was getting ready to go public. And he said, Charlie, I've been trying to headhunt you for 5 years. How about if I give you a software development group to run? And that sounded plenty good to me. So I sort of burned my bridges at the old employer, and then March 2000 hit, and hey, what do you know? My friend's ISP hit the buffers because the private equity company who were backing their IPO pulled out. And the music had stopped, and the .com biz was, hey, what's that hollow popping sound? And I'd already given notice. Luckily, I had a regular magazine column already in the UK. I was a Linux columnist for a British magazine called Computer Shopper. Not the same as the Computer Shopper you get here. The British one was sort of more oriented at the Byte audience back then. So I went from zero to full-time computer journalist in about 2 months of necessity. And this was at the same time that my first novel finally actually caught on and sold. So let's just say I didn't plan the career transition, I was pushed. But it seems to have worked out okay. I was going to riff on to something else from there, but I've forgotten exactly what it was. So.
Could you go back to game design now, having done this book? I mean, not back to game design, but could you imagine yourself doing something like that?
I wasn't in game design, I was actually in writing... interesting back-end software for processing credit cards through British banks. using protocols invented in the 1970s and designed for COBOL applications on mainframes, which I was feeding into with large amounts of object-oriented Perl from a Linux box over the internet. It was a little bit hairy. You, sir?
Actually, I was curious about the machine there.
This is Japanese. It's a Kojinsha SH6, and they don't sell them on this side yet. I was in Japan for the Worldcon a month ago, and I just sort of, ooh, shiny. I've got a very low saving throw against shiny.
What's running on it?
Right now, I'm going to blow my credibility here completely by saying it's running Vista. The reason it's running Vista is because Ubuntu Gutsy Gibbons 7.10 is due out on October the 18th. And I don't want to waste my time sort of installing a buggy alpha when the thing I want to install is coming out in 2 weeks. I'm holding off pending doing the Indian rope trick of getting it onto this machine. At which point this machine will finally be usably fast. I think you back there, sir?
I was wondering, so you released one of your books under a Creative Commons license, and that's how I found out about you and became a fan. And it seems to have worked out pretty well for you. I was wondering how other authors react to that, holding your story.
Well, I have been called a pixel-stained techno-peasant wretch. But let's not get personal. I should add, my personal opinion on the utility of the Creative Commons stuff and what we should be doing, and on the sensible nonsense of DRM, well, let's just say #include corydoctoroh.h. However, my situation is slightly different from Cory's. I am dealing with multiple publishers on different land masses, some of whom are a lot less understanding and flexible than Tor in the US. In fact, in dealings with at least one major publisher I work with, it's like kicking a dead whale up a beach. Now, I would like to be able to do more Creative Commons releases of novels, but I'm handicapped to some extent by, at this point I think it's not actually unreasonable of a British publisher to spike a CC release of a novel on the American publication date if they're not going to be ready to go to press for 9 months. There's a difference between releasing the novel at the same time as the Dead Tree edition to generate sales, and releasing it so early that everybody's already read it before the paper one comes out. So it's a bit problematic, and I'm trying to fiddle and fidget and find a way to actually doing it consistently and effectively. Meanwhile, all I can say is that, in principle, when my books go out of print and the rights revert, at that point I will be releasing them. What?
Just thank you. Let's just say there are a few of your items that I would cheerfully go out and get the paper edition for, just to pay you while I grab the electronic copy from my collection.
Well, I'm fine with that. I'm officially, according to my contracts, not supposed to encourage people to engage in internet piracy or anything like that. But I'd like to remind people that, stripped of all the hype and stripped of all the electrons and bits and the electronics and the internet, in the old days we used to have a group of people who would buy one copy of a book and get all their friends to read it without paying royalties. We had a technical term for these people. We called them librarians. I think the people who are panicking about piracy on the internet are barking at the wrong tree. I'd be much more worried about publishers in foreign countries who pay a translator a cash rate for sort of work to hire to translate a book and then run the presses without actually letting the author know they've done it. That's actual tangible damage to authors, and that's the kind of piracy I'm worried about. But that's another matter entirely. You, sir?
In Acceleron, you used a reputation economy as a means of social change.
Mm-hmm.
And in Glasshouse, you did the same, but almost inverted as a means of
repression,
social control. Can you talk about that contrast a bit and how reputation economies might affect society?
I'd prefer not to. However, what I will say about Glasshouse is it had three things feeding into it that you need to know about to understand where I was coming from. One, I'm a big fan of John Varley. In particular, I was a fan of his 8 Worlds novels, and I'd been waiting for about 7 years for a book he'd been trailing called Steeltown Blues. And a new novel of his came out in 2003, and lo and behold, it was Red Thunder. And instead of the sort of thing I'd been expecting, what he'd come up with was a Heinlein juvenile. And, there's only one John Varley, but there's any number of Heinlein juvenile authors. And I was really disappointed. And I thought, why don't I roll my own John Varley novel? That's point 1. Point 2, I'd been playing with The Sims too much at this point. You can torture them to death and do really weird things with them. You put them in a building and wall them up so they can't get out, and they can turn into a ghost. But I began thinking, simulated societies, this is interesting stuff. And we do actually have situations where we do build artificial simulated societies. Experimental archaeology. People go and live in Iron Age communities to try and figure out, from what we know of the artifacts left behind, how people would have lived in them. And finally, I've been reading a bit about the Stanford prison study, which Professor Zimbardo ran, the one on obedience to authority and particularly allocating people at random to be prisoners and guards, and the way it seemed to generate a deterministic society. And I just sort of put 2 and 2 together and got 16 by thinking, What if we apply the Stanford Prison Study Protocol to gender roles in a post-human society? And that's where Glasshouse came from. I'm sorry if that's a little bit heavy. I thought it was sick and twisted and fun.
It was. I like that in the book.
You say?
Actually, out of curiosity, I know you have like heavy technical skills. So you had one-time pads used in network devices in Halting State, and I'm wondering if there's a story behind that, or if it's...
One-time pads are pretty damn cumbersome and hard to distribute keys for, but they are, if done properly, provably unbreakable. If you've got quantum computers running around and they've already compromised your infrastructure enough to get any data they want off it, then anything less than a one-time pad is going to be vulnerable. At least that's what I was figuring on. I seem to have bluffed my way past Bruce Schneier. You, sir?
Are we going to be getting any more Bob Howard novels?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I've got some good news for you, I hope. The good news is that the Jennifer Morgue should be getting a trade paperback out in the next couple of months. Meanwhile, I've got a couple of books I've got to write first. I've got to write the numbers 5 and 6 of the Merchant Prince's books. And that's going to take me most of the next year. But I'm getting my stuff together to pitch for 2 more laundry novels. I don't know whether they'll come out back to back with other stuff in between, but it is an ongoing series and I want to write a couple more. And I know what the next 2 are, which suggests that I'm reading them faster than I can write them in my head.
And the problem is?
I need to multitask. I need more of me. I need a replicator. If only.
So does that timeline mean that the new space opera that you were mentioning earlier is already written?
I have handed it in. I am waiting for confirmation that my editor likes it. My agent likes it. Charles Brown of Locus likes it, but I don't know what my editor thinks of it. Because it's a bit sick and twisted. I mentioned Heinlein Juveniles. Now, I thought at first I was going to try and write a sequel to Iron Sunrise, but in the end I just couldn't go back there. Bear in mind I began Iron Sunrise in 1998, it's old stuff, water under the bridge, and I can't really work in that universe anymore. But I suddenly realised it was the centennial of Robert A. Heinlein's birth. And everybody and their dog has been doing Heinlein Juveniles of late. You hear John Scalzi talk about it. You know, this was the gateway drug that introduced so many people to SF in the 1950s. But I'm sorry, the gateway drug introducing people to SF today has moved on. It's for PlayStation. It's computer games. So I thought, you know, Heinlein Juveniles do not interest me. The field is oversubscribed already. You've got John Scalzi, you've got John Varley, you've got Spider Robinson. The world does not need a Charlie Stross Heinlein Juvenile. On the other hand, what aren't they doing? Well, nobody's doing late period Heinlein tribute novels.
You're a bad man, Charlie.
Carry on.
So I thought to myself, I'm about 40. Take my agent, subtract it from Heinlein's. Imagine what a 58-year-old Heinlein would be doing today, having lived into the age of anime and manga and boing boing, and soaked all that good stuff up and even played computer games. What would a 58-year-old Robert Heinlein, who is alive today, be writing? And, well, you've got to have a starting point when you're doing a late period Heinlein. I figured my starting point was quite obvious. It had to be a red-headed heroine with a nipple that goes spun. So I then sat back and thought, hang on a mo, nipples don't go spun. Real ones don't. So, how do I make a nipple go spun? Aha, I know what, I'll make her a robot.
We are the Borg.
Yeah. Then I thought, well, Heinlein protagonists also have existential issues to deal with. They're dealing with issues. What's her issue could be? I know what. She's a sex robot. And the reason she's got existential issues is because she came off a production line a year after the last human male went extinct. She has serious problems. Not getting laid is only one of them. And I then decided I'd pick one of Heinlein's standard plots, because Heinlein insisted there are only 4 actual plots in fiction. And one I picked was one he refers to as the man who learned better, or in this case, the sex robot who learned better. Although he did use these plots extremely flexibly in the late period to explore a whole lot of different issues. Picking stuff at random, for example, Glory Road, he took one look at the classic fairy tale So I figured, yeah, I was going to have fun. I was going to write a late period Heinlein novel, and I was going to have a nipple that goes spung whenever it starts leaking hydraulic fluid. So I'm now waiting with bated breath for the screams from New York when my editor finally reads it. Sorry if that wasn't quite what you were expecting. Next question? You said?
You suggested that Scotland's going to go independent. Is that really going to happen?
It's not ruled out. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that Scotland had a majority of its population in favour of outright independence as recently as 1997. What lanced the pressure for independence was a very hasty, devolved parliament. Scotland currently has about as much political autonomy as an American state, which is a lot more than it had before Labour came to power. The Scottish National Party is currently running the government in Scotland. The reason they aren't going for outright independence now is quite simply because they don't have an absolute majority. They can't legislate for a referendum. The other political parties would shoot them down. And to be honest, there's not a huge amount of pressure for independence right now. Only about 1/3 of the population really want it at present. But there is one thing I can foresee that would cause pressure for Scottish independence to wake up really fast. That would be a Conservative government in Westminster, because the scars from the Thatcher years have not faded. Scotland was run for 18 years effectively as a colony, and it was not pretty. Furthermore, not only would a Conservative government in Westminster wake up pressure for Scottish independence north of the border, but the Conservatives have nothing to gain by denying it, because Scotland resolutely votes for the left-wing parties. The Conservatives are down to 1 MP north of the border. If they ejected Scotland, they would gain an extra 30 seats in the House of Commons in the balance of power thereafter. It would be in their electoral interests to cut Scotland loose. So I don't think Scottish independence is inevitable, but I don't think it can be ruled out at all. If we look to Brussels at present, where the Flemish and Dutch-speaking contingents are seriously considering splitting the country, we can also look to the unpleasant precedent of Yugoslavia, but also to the polite, amicable, and non-violent separation of the Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. This sort of fission of countries isn't unheard of by a long way in modern Europe. That's the political sermon for the day. Any more questions? No?
One last one.
In the early part of Halting State, your describing scene seems to involve both people practicing with swords or fun objects, and also doing stuff with overlays on it. Were you envisioning like radical changes in being able to get the scenery up that fast or respond to?
Yes.
Okay.
I could go into a long technological exegesis at this point, but if you look at your mobile phone today, what you will see when you look at it is a portable computer roughly comparable to a laptop 5 to 8 years ago in power. The only real bottlenecks are its display technology, which is pathetic compared to a computer, and the keyboard and text entry capabilities. Now, projecting forward a decade via Moore's law, it's not hard to guess but we're going to have mobile phones which are about as powerful as today's really high-end gaming computers, at least in processing speed and memory capacity. We can also look at the standards bodies, and they're already talking about a thing called 4G. Anyone here got a 3G mobile phone? A few of us. It's coming in, it's a new standard, high-speed data most of the time, beats the pants off GPRS. 4G is already being worked on, and the target is 100 megabits per second continuous data throughput to your mobile phone. Yeah. Now, if you think in these terms...
Just got out of my DSL now.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about a blazingly fast, permanent internet connection to a computer as powerful as a high-end gaming machine, and this is in your pocket.
Yes, but can you see the screen?
Now, that's the interesting question. What do you do for a screen? We've gotten accustomed to mobile phones all having cameras in them. In fact, it's difficult getting a phone that doesn't have a camera these days.
Yes.
Camera chips are ubiquitous and cheap. The next thing is display technology. The actual displays in a mobile phone are very small, pretty lightweight. They're getting higher resolution all the time, and they're cheap. Now, contemplate, with a reasonably fast portable processor, a gadget that looks like a pair of sunglasses. What you're actually looking at is a frame with a pair of screens, one for each eye. And on the outside of each screen is a camera, and between them there's a layer of some fairly fast dedicated processing circuitry. If you're short-sighted, it'll do real-time image convolution to look at the image in front of you and project it on the inside of your glasses. If it's dark, hell, they're image intensifiers. Want to go to a ball game? They've got zoom. You'd want glasses like that. Yeah, you'd want glasses.
Oh my God, it'll turn pedestrians into a deadly weapon.
There's more than that. Hyperspectral imaging. You know, suddenly conventional camouflage clothing is going to have to get a whole lot more sophisticated. This sort of thing would be pretty damn attractive even before you add having the ability to do wireless networking to your phone and provide you with a 3D head-up display. The final thing is to be able to mix the 3D head-up display and the actual input from the cameras visually so that you can see objects that are moving around you. Look at a blank wall that's static, you see what's on your screen, look around, and if there's a bus coming towards you, you'll see it jump out of a screen at you. And that's the sort of technology I was thinking of for 10 years' time.
Like Steve Mann have always gone a good way toward that.
Exactly, but he's a specialist. Yeah, he's way ahead of a curve. What I was thinking is this sort of thing can be envisaged. I was trying deliberately not to get into too much detail in the novel, not to try for too much prediction, because it will be obsolete. But that's the sort of thing I was thinking of when referring to people's specs in here.
Thank you.
Again, I need to write the essay about this somewhere public.
Please do.
Yeah.
Prior art, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else, or should we wrap up?
Why don't we go ahead and take one last question? So will be the last
If
question.
you're willing to pay thousands to tens of thousands of dollars or live with VGA or worse resolution, those glasses are here now. I mean, not with the cameras, but the display technology that sits in a fairly ordinary pair of glasses and allows you to see a quarter of VGA or VGA resolution text or screen displays. You can buy that now.
Yeah. The military have been driving this a lot for head-up displays. They'd love to take head-up displays out of helicopter gunships and fighters and put them in infantry helmets. And the technology is getting cheaper all the time.
I've seen reports they're already doing that with Iraq as the test bed, and the troops who hated it at first, once they got the response times up to something where you wouldn't get killed between the warning and the arrival, starting to love it. They lets them coordinate small unit actions like nobody's business.
Although that does remind me, one final note. There's a computer game out there, an online shooter called America's Army. You may have heard of it. It was funded by the Pentagon as a recruiting tool. You play the role of a soldier in various scenarios. I have two anecdotes about America's Army. The first is, because it's distributed widely, various people have got their hands on it. And I gather in Pakistan there's a very popular modification to it where all the protagonists are remapped slightly and you play Al-Qaeda shooting the crap out of the US Army. On the game, it's funded by the US Army. The other anecdote I've heard of, which is unsupported, but it's just too good not to pass on, was about a Delta Force squad who decided for recreation to take over a bunch of computers and log on to America's Army and kick some ass. And they took on a clan of 14-year-olds who kicked their butt. Skills in the real world and skills in computers are not necessarily intertransferable.
Wait, well, everybody, please join me in giving a warm round of applause.